Morning, everyone. This is Anae Augustini, CEO of the CID Insurance Programs, and I want to welcome you to our first of the year new webinars, Professional Liability for Architects, Engineers, and Contractors. This is going to be a really interesting webinar that will, allow you to learn more about the professional liability needed by these professionals. So I want Sienna Vasquez is our professional liability underwriter, and our instructor today is Vanessa Poma. Hopefully I'm saying your name right, Vanessa. She's a senior underwriter. Oh, perfect. For professional liability with Hiscox Insurance, and they write a lot of our professional liability for us. So, and last but not least is Jacob Cole, our marketing specialist, who takes care of everything behind the scenes and makes sure everything runs smoothly. So I'm going to get started and tell you a little bit about the logistics. Many of you that have attended will probably know the rules of the game. You will be muted because there's many of you and less of us, and we're going to be doing actually, Vanessa's going to be doing all the talking, so you'll be able to hear but not talk. However, your voice is really important to us. We would like you to pose any questions throughout the webinar in the chat room, and we'll answer them as we go through the webinar. Either myself or Vanessa or maybe even Jacob will be bringing forth the questions, so please don't hesitate to ask. And then there'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we really would like to get your feedback. It's important to us so that we can always be serving you better. So without further ado, let's let Vanessa take over and talk about the objectives.
Great. Yes. So thank you everyone for joining. We think A&E is an area of immense growth. And with a high demand for professional liability insurance. So we want to make sure we touch base on, what classes of business we're writing within the A&E space, how to recognize whether the risk you have in front of you is either an artisan subcontractor, a general contractor, or a pure designer, and also learn the unique coverage enhancements that each class needs depending on what they are. So with that said, we'll start with architects and engineers, which is going to be the next slide. So architects and engineers carry an immense amount of professional liability exposure. It is 100% professional liability in nature. And these type of policy will provide them with financial protection for any kind of errors and omissions that they perform or fail to perform in the rendering of their design services. It can also cover non-licensed trades within A&E, which would include contractors and construction managers. So again, it protects them against negligence claims while rendering or failing to render their services. These can include anywhere from a design error to a managerial oversight, maybe not even properly documenting a change order and making sure everyone on the project is aware of any changes, providing improper advice, among other ones, just failing to provide their duty of care. When looking to insure an architect and engineer, you want to make sure that you are getting as broad of coverage as possible. And today's forms vary significantly across different markets, but some of the most common enhancements that you should be looking for include your waiver of subrogation, which we'll go into a little bit more detail, blanket additional language, including technology-based services too. Technology is becoming much more relevant these days, and while it's likely not very common that A&E professionals will have technology-based services, some of them do. Some of them are provided, computer-aided design. So having even that ordinary technology services covered is a nice perk. Use of drones too, and also media liability coverage. Next slide, please. So within A&E, there's a broad range of disciplines, right? We could stay here and name them all day long, but these are some of the most common ones that we write and are written across the market space. You're going to have your architects, you're going to have your civil engineers, construction managers, both at-risk construction managers and agency construction managers, electrical engineers, interior designers, land surveyors, and then moves on to some of the higher risk type of engineers, which include your mechanical, even geotechnical engineers, structural, among other ones. We can also, entertain drafting services as an exposure within A&E, even though they're not licensed and they're getting it stamped by an actual true designer. These are all exposures that fall within the A&E realm. Next slide, please. So when looking to insure an engineer or an architect, these are some of the coverages that you should try as much as possible to get secured. Blanket additional insured coverage has become a much more commonly requested item in all of our insurance policies. They decide to contract with client A, and client A will say to the architect, the only way that I'll award you this contract is if you can guarantee me that you'll be able to name me as an additional insured for vicarious liability. So if the client A gets named in a lawsuit for the acts of the architect, that they'll be covered on that vicarious basis. That's very, very common. So most A&E policies, I'm actually not sure how much in the marketplace has this language already included on the form, but you should be looking for blanket additional insured language whenever possible. Blanket waiver of subrogation to clients is also a second commonly made request. This is where the client is requesting that our insured waive their rights to subrogate. So there's a claim, one of their clients makes a claim against the insured. We end up paying X amount, let's just pretend $1 million. Then us, the carrier, have the ability to subrogate against that client who made the lawsuit to begin with to try to recover some of our losses. A lot of clients are uncomfortable with that, so they're requesting that right be waived. So many markets, including Hiscox, does have a blanket waiver of subrogation language built into their forms. Consider coverage for IP infringement claims. This is also far less common today, but some forms will have coverage for intellectual property in the event that they are, coming up with a new design, a new footprint, even coming up with their company design logo, et cetera, et cetera. It's also a nice perk to carry. I think this is far less common in the marketplace, but something to look out for and have included whenever possible. 70-30 hammer clause. I think the standard is 50-50 in the marketplace. So 70-30 is always advantageous. Many of you know probably what a hammer clause is, but in the event that an insured maybe refuses to go with the suggested actions that the carrier is suggesting. So they're facing a lawsuit and the carrier says, I think we should try to settle this claim rather quickly for X amount rather than try to fight it in court. Sometimes insureds and carriers may disagree as to how they want to go about pursuing a claim. So if for some reason the insured decides to take a different path, there is a different amount to be awarded, the hammer clause provides the insured with, the assertion that we'll cover 70% of the outcome of your claim, depending on the path that you took. So if you decided not to go with our advice, that's fine. We'll only cover up to 70% of that, and you'll be responsible for the remaining 30. However, 70-30 is a generous amount. 50-50 is the standard, but a 70-30 is much more advantageous to an insured. Media and advertising coverage. That's something that many markets also have included on their form automatically. Hiscox has it on their form too. It's just providing coverage, in the rendering of their advertising and publicity exposures as they're advertising for their business and soliciting more business. They don't have necessarily a huge exposure with media, but again, it's a nice perk to carry should they ever be involved or face a media sort of claim. Crisis management coverage, that's a nice perk to have. A lot of insureds sometimes, as a result of a design error or a mistake that they made, some kind of professional negligence, can suffer from reputational harm. So crisis management will provide them the ability to, will provide the supplemental expenses to try to mitigate that negative reputational impact. Some markets will include a small sublimit of that coverage, but in the event that your insured is going through that, having a crisis management sublimit will definitely come in handy to kind of help mitigate the impact of any adverse claims history or as an area. Pre-claims assistance and additional payments. These are also sublimits that are typically rendered within an A&E policy. They're definitely great coverage enhancements to have, especially the supplemental additional payments. Oftentimes, insureds have to miss work to attend, either a deposition, or they'll have to attend an arbitration or mediation proceeding, and they can suffer loss of wages, and they also can suffer some expenses while trying to get to those depositions or trying to, meet their arbitration meetings. So there is a sublimit render and provided for those kind of expenses. It typically has a per diem limit. It'll probably be $250, and there'll be a total aggregate. Sometimes it's $10,000, where we'll cover up to that amount. But again, it's also something nice for the insured to have in their back pocket should they be facing a claim. And lastly, defensive licensing, FHA, OSHA, ADA regulations. These are also other enhancement sublimits that are important to carry if they're ever facing some kind of regulatory of licensing proceeding involving these regulations. They'll have some coverage within the form to provide coverage for those either fines or penalties or just investigations.
Sorry.
Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll go through a claim example. This is one of the most common examples that an architect or engineer can go through. They'll typically be hired by another third party to provide design services. In this case, they were providing design services for a shopping center. And during that, during the rendering of their services, there was an error made on the design and a specification that they were hired to do. So because they made that mistake, the project that they had been hired to do had been delayed for 6 months. The developer, who was counting on this project having been done on time and by deadline, ended up missing rental income. They were probably planning on having the project done, let's pretend, by December. And because of the 6 months pushback as a result of the design error, they couldn't generate any rental income on that project for 6 months. So that type of financial loss suffered by our insured clients would be picked up by an A&E E&O policy. It will cover them both the legal and defense costs when facing a claim, as well as any indemnity or settlements or loss that arise from that particular claim. Next slide, please. Great. So now we're going to go into contractors, which is a little bit of a different. It still falls within the A&E spectrum, but they have their own separate forms and they carry their own separate type of exposures. Within contractors, there's typically 2 classes. There is your general contractors, which includes your general design build firms, your at-risk construction managers, your full-blown construction companies, and you also have artisan subcontractors, which are the specialty trade subcontractors, which we'll go into a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. Great. So we'll go through the artisan subcontractors first. So when you think of an artisan subcontractor, they're going to be just the specialty trade subcontractors, the ones that are hired to do one particular type of job, whether it's electrical, whether it's carpentry, whether it's plumbing, HVAC, concrete, paving, you name it, landscaping. So they're typically hired to perform that one particular job within a project. So they need somebody to set up the entire electrical wiring for a new remodel home. That's all they're particularly responsible for. So for that reason, they fall within the artisan subcontractor space. They could be doing either new construction projects as well as just doing remodeling work. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at a subcontractor, both general contractors and subcontractors do carry a very limited amount of professional liability exposure because they're providing a lot of hands-on labor. They're not, an architect or engineer who typically are providing 100% professional services. Their exposures are a little bit more limited on the professional liability side. However, they still have significant exposures that their GL policy may not always pick up. One of them is faulty workmanship. Faulty workmanship is a very great enhancement, and anytime you have a subcontractor on your desk, you should try to see if you can secure a policy with this enhancement included. What faulty workmanship does is typically a general liability policy, if there is faulty work performed, they will cover the liability or damage done to third parties, right? Let's say like a carpet wasn't installed properly and somebody falls as a result of it, or, I don't know, there's some kind of either bodily or property damage as a result. So the GL policy will pick up the damages that had been made to others, but it will not pick up the cost to repair and replace that unit or premise back to its original shape. So that's where faulty workmanship comes in. Faulty workmanship will pick up and fill that gap in their coverage due to faulty work, and it will cover the cost to repair it and bring back that project or premise back to its original shape or condition. This is really important because if they don't have this coverage, they have to bear these costs out of pocket. So if the cost to replace and repair that carpet or paving the sidewalk, whatever it may be, has a financial value, whether it's $500 or $5,000, that's something that the insured will have to come in completely out of pocket and bear that expense on their own. So we highly recommend faulty workmanship be part of their subcontractors' professional liability offering. Contractors' pollution, that's another big exposure that contractors face. Some contractors face it more than others, like a roofing or glacier contractor may have a bigger exposure than, potentially an electrical contractor. So, but it's something that is definitely important to carry. Something that you need to make sure and look out for is that contractors' pollution, when it's covered, it's really cover arising out of the applicant's construction activities. You have to bear in mind that contractors have limited professional liability exposure, so you want to make sure that the coverage you're getting is truly out of construction activities. And a lot of times, mold is a big exposure. That's the most common type of pollution claim that is seen within the residential and commercial small spaces. So ensuring that mold coverage isn't excluded is rather important. So always look out to see if there's any mold exclusions, if there can be any carve-outs, if you can get any sublimits for it. Some carriers do have that automatically included, and it's important to have. Rectification. Rectification is, think of it like, it's some kind of like it's like similar to remediation coverage. It will advance funds whenever design error has been detected and before it turns into a claim. So, if they found that there was faulty wiring installed and it's been recognized and identified, they can notify their carrier about the error, and we can provide funds, upon the approval of the carrier, we can provide funds to rectify that error and bring it back to its healthy and original condition, and before it turns into anything bigger or it snowballs into a claim. So rectification is very important to have, and it's a good preemptive and proactive kind of coverage that can help minimize the losses that insureds face. And lastly, professional liability. It's also part of the offering, but it will, cover any errors arising out of design, engineering, construction management, and or consulting services performed by our insured. Next slide, please. So, faulty workmanship being one of the biggest coverage and one of the largest exposures that an insured faces, I think going through an example would be definitely key. So this is one about a plumbing contractor that improperly installed plumbing and pipes in a new home. There was a leak discovered that was coming down into the floor underneath. The plumbing contractor policy covered the third-party damages to that homeowner's ceiling, flooring, and cabinets. However, the cost to redo the work and replace those faulty pipes was not covered by the GL policy. So an Artisan subcontractor's policy that carries affirmative faulty workmanship coverage would cover the cost to make those faulty pipe repairs and bring them back to their original shape. Again, something that I also like to point out about faulty workmanship, it's very important that it be affirmative whenever possible, that it be part of their insuring agreement. Maybe perhaps there may be some markets that may be silent on the coverage, There may be other markets that may be covered based on arising out of professional services. But again, contractors and subcontractors have a limited professional liability exposure. So it's important that that faulty workmanship recognizes, actual faulty work arising out of construction activities. And then this is an example of a pollution claim within the Artisan space. This is about a concrete subcontractor that did not properly ventilate one of the buildings after pouring concrete on it. As a result, the floor walls and fixtures had developed mold over time. So the contractor's GL policy denied coverage because they had a mold and pollution exclusion on it. So an Artisan's professional liability with pollution coverage would cover the cost to clean up and repair and replace the damage caused by the mold condition. Again, this is why it's really important to make sure that your pollution insuring agreements do carry and provide coverage for mold, because this is the far most common type of claim and pollutant when facing contractors' pollution claims. All right, so we went through Artisan subcontractors, so we'll move on to general contractors, professional liability. So general contractors are not going to be doing a specific trade or a specific trade within the contracting world. They're actually much broader than that. They do provide a wide range of services. A general contractor can be either an at-risk construction manager. They can take complete responsibility over an entire project, making sure they subcontract the designers to carry out the design work, making sure they're subcontracting all the subcontractors needed to perform all the work that will bring the project to a finish. And then we'll go into the next slide, but they need very much the same coverages that a subcontractor will need. So they'll have the professional liability insuring agreement automatically covered. And contractors' pollution should also be provided. Again, here we say arising out of construction activities or operations. That's absolutely vital and key. If you're insuring an architect and engineer, that isn't needed, because an architect and engineer is not performing actual hand labor, is not providing or responsible for overseeing necessarily construction work, but a general contractor is. Therefore, construction activities being the trigger is really important. Make sure that it includes mold coverage, emergency response, restoration costs, as well as known-owned disposal sites coverage. Protected indemnity. Protected indemnity is actually quite new. I don't know. I only know a handful of markets that may offer this coverage. Protected indemnity it's very unique in the contractor space. What it does is it provides coverage to the insured. Let's say an insured had to pay a claim arising out of a design error. So a general contractor was responsible for hiring, let's say, a mechanical engineer to perform work on, a commercial building. And that designer made a mistake. And because of that mistake, they brought our insured into a lawsuit that ended up paying, let's say, $1.5 million. These coverage will give our insured the right to recovery of what they should have recovered from the architects and engineer policy, but that architects and engineers policy for some reason couldn't provide that coverage. So an example would be an architect and engineer policy was only 1 million it only had 1 million limits of liability. But as awarded by the court, the insured would have had the right to recover 1.5. But because the architects and engineers policy only had a 1 million, that means the insured is out of pocket 500,000, right? Or they had to bear that loss. So these owners protective will cover those insured's financial loss, including cost overruns and delays arising out of errors and omissions that were committed or allegedly done by their subcontractor, designers, architects, and engineers brought on board. So there's markets that provide it on an affirmative basis. Look out for that coverage. It's not very unique. It's not very known in the marketplace. But if you have a market that offers that, that is definitely a great perk. And it's something that contractors will face as an exposure. This is why it's very important that contractors make sure that their subcontractor professionals are separately insured. So if I'm a GC, I should be looking out and making sure that if I'm bringing a mechanical engineer on board and then I'm bringing a electrical contractor on board, I need to make sure that they're carrying their own separate limits. Because if they aren't, then the only insurance policy that will be available and will serve as an asset will be the general contractor's policy. So most claims are going to try to go after that policy, which leaves your insured, our insured, further more exposed. So as a good risk management control, general contractors should be making sure that their subcontractor professionals are carrying their own separate professional liability insurance. And rectification we talked about before. This is very, very advantageous. Again, it'll provide funds to rectify an error identified before it turns into a claim. It's like a remediation coverage, and this is typically offered at full limits. This is something that you should also look out to have for your insureds whenever possible. And here's an example of construction professional liability. A contractor hired an engineer to design the shoring on a site excavation for a commercial building. The design of the shoring was improper and inadequate, and it resulted in settlement damage to the neighboring building. That building next door filed a claim against the contractor, but the contractor's GL policy denied coverage as the damage resulted from engineering services. Because damage resulting from engineering services is a known and pretty common exclusion within GL. So a general contractor's policy could trigger coverage for engineering and professional services, as well as provide defense for the building owner's claim. This is one of many type of examples as to what a GC can be held responsible for being responsible for the entire project from beginning to end. Next slide, please. Oh, wow, we went through it quickly.
Yes, well, you're right on time, Vanessa. What a great webinar. So grateful to have you. And I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did that joined us today. If I didn't see any questions that came across, but you could still email us with any questions. And Jacob will be sending, make sure you go to our website. There's lots of tools and upcoming webinars, and you can find them all there on our website under resources. And again, you'll be getting a survey. We'd really like your feedback. And Sienna is ready to take your submissions. Just send them in at submissions@CIDinsurance.com. And there is Sienna's email address if you want to ask her a question. She's fast and responsive, and so we should be able to be there. She will be there for you. All right. Thank you again, Vanessa.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a great day.